What is up, guys? So in my last video I went over what I thought the Arrow cinematic universe would have looked like in phase 1. The Arrow cinematic universe being if the Arrowverse was structured more like the MCU. What I did basically is replace each MCU movie with an Arrowverse equivalent and go over how that would have changed the Arrowverse had all those other things never happened. Specifically, already Arrow seasons 3 and 4 never happened. There's also the Heroes Join Forces crossover that never happened, so things would have to happen differently, and characters would have to debut differently, which we saw in the last phase. Now we're getting into phase 2, which is going to be dealing a lot with the multiverse, much like the Infinity Saga started dealing a lot more with the Infinity Stones in phase 2. They did have a couple of them in phase 1, but phase 2 they really started getting into them. Here it's similar as here in the Arrowverse's Crisis Saga, they really start delving into the multiverse in phase 2 after briefly handling it with Earth 38 in phase 1. With that in mind, I'll be going over every movie in phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, giving it a Arrowverse equivalent, and going into detail about what those equivalents would have looked like, and everything that would have skipped, and everything that would have, because of that, the events or characters just never happen or appear. With that in mind, let's begin with the first phase 2 movie, Iron Man 3. So the first two Iron Man movies equivalents were seasons of Arrow. I mean, those two franchises are definitely fairly similar. It's the first hero that started the universe. It's also about a billionaire who gets stranded somewhere and he watches his mentor die. Then he comes back and his main goal is to right the wrongs of his father and also just be a hero. It's very, very similar. It's a very similar concept, so it makes sense that these two franchises would be linked. In Iron Man 3, I definitely would like to skip Arrow Season 3 and Arrow Season 4, because while those seasons definitely have much more concrete endings than the subsequent seasons, they also are significantly worse, especially than the season that I'm going to be going over here, which is Arrow Season 5. With Arrow Season 3 and Season 4 being skipped, that means that Sarah never dies, instead just becoming White Canary without dying and then joining the Legends without ever dying. Roy never fakes his death, and he also never leaves Team Arrow, because, I mean, if this was a movie universe, the actor would probably be less likely to leave because, I mean, he would be paid a lot more and he would have more incentives, so I don't think Colton Haynes would have ever left the show if this was a movie universe, and also there's just no time for that storyline. Obviously, Oliver never faces off against Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins. In the flashbacks, we never see Oliver go to Hong Kong, and we never see Tatsuya Mashiro either. In Arrow Season 4, or because Arrow Season 4 never happened, Laurel never dies, and instead of Dinah Drake replacing Laurel, and then we see Earth 2 Laurel and everything like that, we just continue with the regular Earth 1 Laurel until the end, which is something that they should have done anyway, but because Arrow Season 4 never happened, we're just replacing every Black Canary storyline that is possible going forward with just the Earth 1 Laurel. Oliver also obviously never faces off against Damien Dark and Hive and the Ghosts, and characters like Curtis Holt don't debut, as well as Evelyn Sharp, and the Season 4 flashbacks aren't shown, and we just really see instead Oliver on the island, probably by himself, after his time in Russia. So that brings us to Season 5, which also has some significant changes, including, like I said, Curtis Holt never debuts, so Mr. Terrific never appears either. With this being more well-structured, characters like Mr. Terrific, they have no room on Team Arrow. Also, Ragman, the second Black Canary, and also Wild Dog never appear either. So because Dinah Drake doesn't exist, and because Season 6 never happens, Vigilante's identity would be revealed here, and he would be a different character. Vigilante would still be in the movie because he is instrumental for the Adrian Chase Prometheus twist, which would not have worked without him because of the comic book history of Adrian Chase being Vigilante. So instead, Vigilante would not be Vincent Sobel, which is his original character anyway. He would be the original Vigilante, Greg Sanders, which is a character that would be used for the twist, and he would also probably die at the end of the season. Talia's motivation is not about the fact that Oliver killed Ra's, because that never happens. Instead, it could be connected to Malcolm Merlyn, as Malcolm Merlyn was a member of the League of Assassins, and that is Oliver's only ties to the League of Assassins in this version of the Arrowverse. So maybe Talia and Malcolm were in love or something, or maybe Talia was in love with him or something like that, and that Oliver killed him. So Talia swears revenge. Because Season 4's flashbacks never happened, Oliver's motivation to go to Russia is a little bit different. Instead of being from Tiana in the Season 4 flashbacks, it would be from Tiana during the Season 2 flashbacks, and she would just be like the sister of Anatoly or something. Because there's already a Russian character there, you would have an easy way to get him from the Season 2 flashback storyline directly to Russia, and because of that, he does spend this flashback year in Russia, but the next 2 years he spends on the island completely alone. So one other thing has to do with Thea Queen. You probably noticed that because Season 3 and Season 4 never happened, Thea never had her whole storyline of going to live with Malcolm and being trained by Malcolm, then becoming Speedy, and then her whole storyline as Speedy in Season 4, none of that happens, and then even the storyline in Season 6. So basically, Thea's entire Speedy storyline just never happens, and instead, I would just put it here. Like, I would say between Green Arrow The Promise and Green Arrow, this movie, which I actually haven't named yet. I'll give it a title at the end of when I'm going to talk about it. But I think that in between those movies, Oliver started training Thea, and she becomes Speedy in this movie. The final change has to do with the fact that this isn't leading into Arrow Season 6, it's leading into the next Avengers movie or the next Justice League movie, so you can't really have the Lian Yu explosion here. Instead, you can have it, but just it's not a cliffhanger, it's an explosion that happens, and then we do see the aftermath of that explosion, and the cliffhanger is just how Oliver deals with that emotionally, not who dies, which was a weak cliffhanger anyway because, I mean, they were never going to follow up on it, so I think that this would work better anyway. So those are all the changes that would happen to Arrow Season 5 if Arrow Seasons 3 and 4 never happened, and if it was a movie instead of a season. And the episodes we will focus on are So It Begins, Vigilante, What We Leave Behind, Checkmate, Capuchon, Disbanded, and Lian Yu, and what I would call it is Green Arrow Vengeance. Alright, so I spent a lot of time on that first movie, so let's move on to the next one, which is the equivalent to Thor the Dark World, which would be The Flash Season 2, which is, I think, very, very fitting, because Thor the Dark World, I mean, just the subtitle The Dark World could kind of be the subtitle to The Flash Season 2, because Earth 2 is kind of the Dark World, but I would name this movie The Flash Into the Multiverse, kind of like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but into the multiverse instead, as this is really our introduction to the multiverse. There wouldn't really be that many changes, specifically compared to Arrow Season 5's, because there aren't any seasons skipped, but there are some changes that I will go over. So the first minor change has to do with the Firestorm storyline. It is really only just one episode, but we do see Martin Stein a bit. So Martin Stein never appears because Firestorm's storyline is a little bit different. He never appeared in The Flash's first movie, instead debuting in Invasion, so he debuted after the Singularity happened. So he debuted after his original counterpart died. So Ronnie Raymond is still alive, so Jefferson Jackson has yet to debut. We might see him later in the universe, but as of right now, Ronnie Raymond is still given a little bit more time as Firestorm, so we don't see him becoming, or we don't see Jefferson Jackson at all, really, and we also don't see Hawkman and Hawkgirl. This movie stands completely on its own, separate from any Legends of Tomorrow setup that The Flash Season 2 was holding back by. But I would say the biggest change I would make to this, to The Flash Season 2 or The Flash Into the Multiverse, has to do with the multiverse. In The Flash Season 2, we really only see Earth 2, which is a good start to the multiverse, but there was other seasons afterwards, like Seasons 3 and 4, or even other crossover events, where we did see an expansion on the multiverse, especially in Crisis on Infinite Earths, but before that, we did have like more personal universes, like Earth 3 and Earth 19, and even Earth 2, we did see more of that, like in Gorilla City. So because The Flash Season 3 and 4 and 5 and things like that are never going to happen, I would put maybe more universes into The Flash Into the Multiverse, specifically maybe a little bit more of Earth 2, like maybe instead of seeing Reverb and Killer Frost, we can just go straight to Gorilla City and see that storyline happening here. So maybe elements of Seasons 3 would be here. We'd also see Gypsy in Earth 19, we would visit Earth 3 and see the real Jay Garrick probably at the end of the movie, but I would see a little bit more of the multiverse instead of just focusing on really just Earth 2 and just Central City in Earth 2 as well. And the final big change has to do with the cliffhanger ending. In the original Season 2, Barry goes to save his mother in the past. That just doesn't happen. As excited as that did get me for the Flash Season 3, and as good as a cliffhanger as it was, first of all, they never really lived up to the cliffhanger, and while they would probably, it would be a lot better in this movie structure, there is just no room for the Flashpoint storyline. There isn't really a movie that I could replace in the MCU to be Flashpoint. We're getting to a universe or even multiverse changing event anyway with Crisis on Infinite Earths, so there's no real purpose for Flashpoint, specifically since Invasion already happened, so the Dominator's motivation was different anyway, and spoiler alert, the Flash Season 3 storyline is never going to exist, so Savitar is not a character that's going to exist, and Kid Flash is going to just get his powers in a different way, so Flashpoint never happens, as sucky as that is, because Flashpoint is an awesome storyline within a movie structure, in a cinematic universe structure, probably would have ended up being really, really cool, but we could see that in the future anyway. Next up is Captain America the Winter Soldier and its equivalent, which would be a season of Supergirl, but actually I would be combining two seasons, seasons 2 and 3, or really one element of season 2 with mainly just season 3. Season 3 with the Legion of Superheroes and Reign is probably the most interesting thing that Supergirl has ever done, and while they didn't really do it completely well, or they didn't really have the resources to do so, in this movie universe, seeing the Legion of Superheroes and all of them going up against Reign would be really, really cool, specifically since we would probably see a lot more members of the Legion. But one element of Season 2 that I would like to implement is the introduction of Superman, because there isn't really any other good place to introduce him, like maybe in Elseworlds, but I feel like that would be a little bit of a late introduction to the character, so instead I would like to see introduction to him here. And I would also, one change to the Legion is that I would make it so that they were inspired by Superman, like the comics, not like Supergirl, and that he was a former member, because we did see that he had a Legion ring in Supergirl in Season 1, so those are things that I would really put together. It's mainly based off of Season 3, but with Superman and how he would fit into all of that. So because Season 2 never happened, aside from the introduction of Superman, there are things from Season 2 that we never see. Specifically, Jimmy doesn't become Guardian. That would have to be the biggest thing. It's not really necessary for him to become Guardian, like for anything, so he never becomes a Guardian, which is fine. We also don't see a backstory between Mon-El and Kara. They meet during the events of Season 3 when Mon-El is already a hero and already a member of the Legion of Superheroes. We also, Kara and Lena don't meet until the events of Season 3, and basically almost everything else that happened in Season 2 that I'm mostly blanking on, except obviously for the introduction of Superman, we don't ever see, and also Superman and Kara never face off against each other. So I would name this movie the Captain America Winter Soldier equivalent to Supergirl Reign of the Legion, and the episodes it would focus on are from Season 2, The Adventures of Supergirl and the Last Children of Krypton, and then from Season 3, Reign, Legion of Superheroes, and Shelter from the Storm, with Shelter from the Storm acting as the finale despite it not really being the finale of Season 3. And next up is Guardians of the Galaxy, and we're finally getting to the introduction of the Legends, as they really only form here, which is a lot later than they did in the original Arrowverse, since Invasion already happened, and we do see a lot of seasons that already happened, like Arrow Season 5 happening before Legends of Tomorrow Season 1. Anyway, this is Legends of Tomorrow Season 1, the movie would just be called Legends of Tomorrow, and there would be slight differences. Hawkman and Hawkgirl only make their debut here, and they don't leave in the end, because just to make their debut and then leave, that would be a little bit weird, so they stick around a little bit longer, but also they're probably, or I hope they would be better versions of the characters. We also don't see Hourman showing up in the end, instead the JSA are completely introduced in the next movie. And Firestorm is still Ronnie Raymond, not Jefferson Jackson, because Ronnie never died. The episodes that this movie would focus on are Pilot Part 1, Pilot Part 2, Star City 2046, The Magnificent 8, and Legendary, which is, I really think, a good structure there. We start with the team coming together. We learn about the whole story with the Hawks and Vandal Savage and Rip Hunter's backstory, which is Pilots Part 1 and Part 2. Then the Legends go to the future, which is Star City 2046, and then the Legends go to the past, the Magnificent 8. And finally, we get the big finale, which is Legendary, which is, I think, a little bit better structured than the season itself, which played off a concept that probably would have worked a lot better as a movie than as a TV show. But also, Star City 2046, I'm hoping would end up looking a little bit more in line with what the time period ended up looking like in the end. I mean, there were so many plot holes that they had to end up making it a different universe, where Oliver is still alive in the future, Connor Hawke and John Diggle Jr. are somehow the same person, and Connor Hawke is the Green Arrow instead of Mia Queen. So I'm hoping that this is the true future of Star City, where Oliver is indeed dead. Maybe we do see Mia Queen for the first time in Legends of Tomorrow, and they don't have to end up making it a different universe, because this is not a multiverse traveling, universe traveling show or even movie. It's a time travel movie. So with that in mind, that's Legends of Tomorrow. So next up is Avengers Age of Ultron, and its equivalent, which is pretty obvious, Crisis on Earth X, or what the movie would be titled, Justice League Crisis on Earth X. Now, this would actually not have a lot of differences, because there doesn't really need to be that many differences. The biggest differences have to do with certain characters that don't exist, like Wild Dog and Mr. Terrific, and characters that are still around, like the Legion of Superheroes, or Arsenal, or Black Canary, or Martian Manhunter are also being included. That's really the biggest difference, except for one of the villains, having to do with, well, they replaced each member of the Trinity, or they had a member of the Trinity, an evil version of them on the New Reich, except for the Flash. They had Dark Arrow replacing Green Arrow, Overgirl replacing Supergirl, but replacing the Flash was not an evil version of himself, it was just the regular Reverse Flash, which was cool and all, but that wasn't really the strongest appearance of the Reverse Flash, and it was a little bit out of character. Plus, it would have been really cool to see Blitzkrieg, or the evil version of Barry Allen. The reason we didn't see him, and the reason they went with just the Reverse Flash, is because we kind of already got an evil version of Barry Allen as the main villain of The Flash Season 3, which was Savitar. However, as you can probably tell where I'm going with this, Savitar does not exist in this version of the universe. He never appeared because The Flash Season 3 never happened, and neither did Flashpoint, and then neither did the consequences of Flashpoint. So Savitar doesn't exist, so there's no reason to not replace the Reverse Flash with an evil version of Barry Allen, which would be the member of the New Reich, Blitzkrieg, which would be played by Grant Gustin, which would also be the biggest difference between the Crisis on Earth X's of the Arrowverse and the Arrow Cinematic Universe. So Crisis on Earth X took place during The Flash Season 4, and the main drawing point of all these heroes coming together at that point was the wedding between Barry and Iris. That is not something that really could have happened because The Flash Season 4 never happened. However, that is something that we could easily change around. Just make it so that Barry proposes to Iris at the end of The Flash Into the Multiverse, and then they get married here still, so there's no real change there. But one change that there is, aside from that, within the world of The Flash, has to do with Wally West. I would make it so that Wally gets his powers maybe at the end of The Flash Into the Multiverse, not in a way that's connected to Flashpoint, but in a different way, maybe connected to Zoom, something like that. Maybe he gets Zoom's speed or something, but then he becomes Kid Flash in between Into the Multiverse and Crisis on Earth X, and he debuts as Kid Flash in Crisis on Earth X. And finally, the last change has to do with Firestorm. The big death in Crisis on Earth X is Martin Stein. However, this time around, it would not be Martin Stein. It would be Ronnie Raymond. His death is delayed from The Flash Season 1's finale, or The Flash's Season 2 premiere, to Crisis on Earth X, and that's when he's replaced by Jefferson Jackson. Jefferson doesn't replace him as Ronnie Raymond just yet, but we will see that in the next movie of Legends of Tomorrow, where we see the dynamic beginning between Martin Stein and Jefferson Jackson. That's really why I wanted to replace Ronnie with Martin Stein here, so I didn't want to kill Martin Stein yet, because we never really saw him with Jefferson Jackson, which was a very, very interesting, very fun dynamic in Legends of Tomorrow that I would still like to see in this universe. And the final Phase 2 movie is Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man doesn't really have a clear counterpart. There is really a clear counterpart to every franchise, or everything works, but there isn't really a clear counterpart to Ant-Man other than maybe one of the CW seed shows, and the one that fits better is Freedom Fighters The Ray. It also just so happens that this comes out right after Age of Ultron, so it would be set right after that movie, or right after Crisis on Earth X, with maybe this movie dealing with the aftermath of that. At the end of that movie, Overgirl dies, and in this movie, Overman, her cousin, which is obviously the equivalent to Superman, vows his revenge against the freedom fighters. So that is basically the main conflict here. The New Reich is mostly disbanded, but Overman, who was the Führer of the New Reich, now vows revenge, and he is the main villain with the freedom fighters like the Ray, Phantom Lady, Black Condor, Dollman, Red Tornado, and yes, we could also see Citizen Cold all face him, somehow take him down some way. I mean, he is Overman, he is Superman, I don't know how, but that would be the main conflict of this movie, which is nothing like the first season of Freedom Fighters The Raid, but I don't really care, because while I do like the concept of that show, I think they really could have done so much more with it, because they really didn't do anything. So I would use Overman. Maybe we would also see other members of the Freedom Fighters expand on Earth X, because I think that would be really cool. So that is Phase 2 of the Arrow Cinematic Universe. That was a long video. I can't imagine how long Phase 3 is going to be. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Were there any things that you would have changed? Maybe certain seasons that you wouldn't have skipped? Maybe certain seasons that you would have replaced with the ones that I chose? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.